and Bin. So, very diverse panel.
Thank you. Good to see you again. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Robert Hernandez, digital journalism professor from USC Annenberg and moderator for this panel, and dork with a bunch of 360 cameras and gear that I'll be perhaps live streaming our session in 360 in a little bit. Today, we're kicking off the conference with the session focusing on VR and VR in journalism. VR is here to stay, whether you like it or not. It's happening. And the question that we're going to focus on in the second half is really what's next. We have an incredible, actually before I start, is Pippo here? Pippo, who tweeted at me that said, hey, Hernandez, web journalist, those aren't VR glasses, those are Snapchat glasses. So in honor of him, I put a headset over her there. Before we start, I want to get a sense of who has tried VR. VR means different things to different people, but raise your hand if you've done 360 video, experienced 360 video, okay? Raise your hand if you tried room scale VR, that's HTC Vive or the Oculus Rift, okay? Who is producing these experiences? Besides this great panel, who's producing it? It's a handful there, good. And then is anyone getting into the augmented reality, mixed reality game? Anyone producing that? Okay, we got one hand. Okay, great. So that gives us a sense of the room. They know what VR is, at the very least how to spell it, experience it, and also produce it. This session, we're going to start off with slides that introduce each person. And then we're going to just have an informal conversation about this platform and this medium. And we need your participation. So please speak up, ask questions. Challenge us and share your knowledge. So we have an incredible set of panelists today. We're going to start with Bing. Do you guys have microphones? Perfect. So each one of them has about 3 to 5 minutes to talk about what their work is, what their company does in this space. So Bing, please.
Hello, everyone. I will use very poor English to introduce myself and my work because I promised my mom I can use English to make a speech to everyone to talk about the China story. Before I worked at CCTV around 10 years, then I find no people watch TV station in China. But the internet is too hot in China. So I asked myself, what is the next internet in China in the world? So bring this question, I left China, I left my country, CCTV, and I went to New York City. So then I find the VR technology can change the media industry. So I have some issue around my life. For example, first, in China, you know, people can't use Google. People can't use Gear VR. People can't use Oculus. I think if we can't use great content, we can't use great technology, we can't get more and more information from different countries, from different media industry. So I think that is an issue. Second, when I decided to Tribeca Film Festival, I found no China VR content company show China story for everyone. Just the China investor around the Tribeca Festival. So I think this is an issue too. Then we came back to China. We already built the first professional VR cinema in China. That is an amazing thing. We first time use laser light split our cinema. We first time use 3D printing technology for our dream space. I will make some interested for different consumers. I will tell different consumers the VR technology can change the world. This is our mission and our dream. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bing. So Bing will talk about later in terms of that transition to go from traditional broadcast into this space, cinema. And will you, Bing, before we transition, can you talk about this gentleman here?
Around 1 week ago, one very old man visited to our cinema. He told us before he worked at Beijing University around 40 years. He researched about Universal, so we give him some content from NASA, so he can work on Move. Then he wrote some article in WeChat friends group. He told everyone, "Oh, today I will thank you for technology. I will thank you for Yuechen technology team because I already finished my dream. I already work on the move." I think new technology is amazing. He can help us to get more and more dream in the world. So thank you, VR technology.
Thank you for sharing that story. Up next is Jonathan. You have a microphone there? There you go. Talk about Tencent.
Hi, everyone. Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Jonathan He. I am the general manager for products and technologies for Tencent in China. I own the systems and technologies for streaming technologies and video platforms that's powering Tencent Video and Tencent News. So over the years, Tencent Video and Tencent News has become the one of the largest media platform in China. And today I would like to share what we have experimenting since 2015. So the first VR show that we have is the on October 25th, 2015, that we have done for a Korean band called Big Bang. Big Bang is holding a very big live musical event in Macau, and we do the live streaming for both the normal video streaming and also the VR streaming as well. And to my surprise, there were over 100,000 people watching the VR streaming in 2015. So that's our first VR experiment. And since then, we have done VR shows for sports matches, for meetings, for live events, etc. And also today, I brought a small clip that's the current, that's the China People Congress meeting in the CPPCC, which is also another powerful committee in China, and we do the VR live streaming for those events in 2017. So Robert, if you can show.
So I'll play that video. One disclosure that we all painfully know is that whenever you show immersive content on a big screen, it looks horrible. So take our word for it that you probably need experience closer up, but here is a clip.
2011月3日下午，中国人民政治协商会议第12届全国委员会第5次会议在人民大会堂开幕。全国政协12届5次会议应出席委员2205人，迟到2134人，符合规定人数。大会首先审议通过了政协第12届全国委员会第5次会议议程。俞正声代表政协第12届全国委员会常务委员。
So we can skip the rest because it's almost the same, and it's, as Robert says, it's horrible to show on a big screen. And also we have expanded our ways of using VR as a technology means into other fields such as variety shows, which I've also brought a short clip. So this is called Cross King. It's a cross-border artist doing singing competition. It's a variety show, and we also do the VR live streaming for backstage performances and also the recording sessions.
年轻姑娘的面容浮现在我的心上，年轻姑
Robert, we
娘
can
的
skip the rest.
面容。
Thanks. So I would like to share two other progresses that we have in the VR field. The first is that this year, in 2017, we have opened up to the third-party content providers to upload their VR contents onto our platform. And then we have programs is to work with these third-party vendors to encourage them to do better content and also to provide ways to help them grow. So that's the first thing that we do. And the second thing is that we have a VR channel in our video platform, Tencent Video. The users can see all the VR contents, all the VR live streaming recordings from our app whenever the users would like to experience the 360 show, or even plug into your cardboard and enjoy the VR show. That's basically what we do now, and I believe that we'll talk about what we do next in our session.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Next up is Latoya Peterson from the Undefeated, ESPN's. You guys have been, how recent is the movement into 360 VR for you guys?
From the ESPN perspective, it's been about a year. From the Undefeated perspective, this is a work in progress that we're showing. It hasn't actually aired yet, so you guys get a sneak peek. So yes, hello Gen Summit, how are you? If you guys remember me from last year, I was on this stage talking about video games with Marcus and with Therese. So this time I'm back. I'm the deputy editor over digital innovation for the Undefeated, which means I'm supposed to be up on all the emerging tech, which means 360, VR, AR, MR, as all these things are transitioning. A little bit of taste in terms of chat products. We do a little bit of that. We're also looking on artificial intelligence and machine learning in the workplace, and that's a thing that I've been focusing on. So it's kind of all around tech geek. And the thing that draws me to VR and the thing that draws me to 360 is one, that the landscape is still wide open on content, right? We still haven't made, essentially, a lot of experts have noted, a killer app for VR. There isn't a place where a lot of consumers are like, this is where I want to go, this is what I want to be yet. And so the field is still wide open, and it needs us as content creators to be making that contribution, right? Until there is that moment, until there is that divine thing that people want to use VR for, we're still going to see sluggish adoption rates, and we're still going to see or have that uphill battle when we're talking to our newsrooms. I'm coming from the manager perspective, so I'm always trying to make the financial argument for something. You're still going to see that uphill battle where you're going, okay, there's not a lot of adoption yet, there's not a lot of rates yet, what are we going to do, and why should we invest in this over other types of emerging technologies? So a lot of what we've been doing, and I think the word that been used was experiments, and it's experiments in technology and experiments in this space because things are still emerging and things are still happening. So one of the things that I noticed at the Undefeated, we cover the intersection of race, culture, and sports. And when I'm in VR environments, I notice a lot of them are made for people that don't look like me, that don't have any of my cultural background, and that means that it depresses the market. Store, and the only thing that's focusing on an African-American person is either sports, which I work in now, which is fine, or music. You start wondering what else could there be, or what other worlds are we not exploring? So if you want to cue up the VR piece right now, the thing that we worked on was going to Syracuse at a step show, and so this serves two purposes. First, to expose a broader audience to a very unique black college culture in the United States, which is very separate and distinct and has its own kind of rituals that you'll see here, which is a step show. And then the second piece of it, too, was from the manager perspective. I had to prove to the folks at my company that we could do 360 video or VR for cheaper. ESPN does the high-end premium experiences, right? So we do the jaunt machine that's $20,000 to $40,000. It takes a crew of 2. It takes a lot of pre-planning, all these things. This is the equivalent of a run and gun. This is the equivalent of getting a phone call from your producer and running a fire drill. Can we do this with 2 crew, going out immediately, no scouting, no pre-stuff, nothing else? What can we create if we just have the Omni GoPro unit, if we just have 2 people? What can we make? So let's hit it. So these are the winners of the competition, by the way. We opened with them. And this is a step show at Syracuse University.
The ice cold brothers go like.
So this popping up at the bottom, if you're not from African American culture, you might not know about our Greek system, and that the Greeks, there are 9 sororities and fraternities called the Divine Nine that do these kind of performances. They're called step shows, and it's a very rhythmic kind of exploration of culture. So these teams prepare all year long. They produce them at homecoming during the season, and it's a known part of black college culture along with strolling and things like that. So being able to take people inside, the fun part is if you're in a 360 experience, you're looking at the people on stage, but there's also a lot of audience participation behind you. So if you turn around, a lot of times what you're going to see is that the audience is shouting, the audience is cheering on for because they're all with the different competing fraternities and sororities. So there's a lot of richness that you can explore that doesn't currently exist in the VR or 360 landscape.
Cool. Great.
So I think that's me.
Yeah. So next up is Francesca. How long has The Guardian been dabbling in VR, AR, immersive stuff?
Well, we launched our VR studio a year ago, but we'd been kind of prototyping for about a year before that. So the first piece that we launched was 6x9, which is an experience of solitary confinement in American prisons. We launched that last April as a kind of proof of concept, really, to try and see what VR could mean in journalism for The Guardian. And then following on from that, we set up a studio. We've got a team of about 6 people actually producing content in-house. So we decided we were going to take on making VR within The Guardian, bringing on people when we don't have the skills and expertise in-house to work with them. But we're very much looking at what does it take to make VR in-house, and what does that journalism actually look like? And that really is quite experiential. So we take VR really seriously as a medium, trying to think, why can this do something that all of our other forms of journalism can't take? You know, we've got video, we've got podcasts, we've got interactives, we've got a whole range of different tools at The Guardian that we can use, but as a very immersive experience, taking you to kind of physical places, letting you experience things you couldn't otherwise experience. What are those stories that are most relevant in VR, and how do you actually translate that? Which is an enormous challenge because, as Latoya was saying, it's a brand new field. People, it's kind of wide open how you interpret that. We are using the time at the moment to really explore and, you know, to use the same word, experiment in form, in treatment, in storytelling. So you've just brought up Underworld, which was our second piece, which is a piece about urban exploration. And so in this piece, you're kind of guided by an American urban explorer, Bradley Garrett, in the underground labyrinth of sewer systems, Victorian kind of great tunnel systems that go under the city. And we used the Daydream headset to be able to use the kind of navigational control for that. So it's branching narratives, using movement actually in VR, as well as using kind of real storytelling and kind of documentary techniques at the same time. The third piece that we created was First Impressions, which is from the perspective of a baby. So you're put in the position of an infant from day 1 till about 6 months, and it shows the visual development that happens during that time, but also the importance of contact and interaction from your caregivers during the first 2 years. So we worked with baby clinics, with neuropsychologists, to kind of use the latest research on what visual development is, but then also worked with actors to kind of dramatize this, putting you in the position of a baby. Do you want to play the trailer for that?
I'll play the trailer. One of the things that, I don't know if you caught right there, she worked with actors. Which newsroom works with actors? So that's something that comes up in conversation of those challenges, new frontiers for us. But here's the piece.
Welcome to your first day. You don't know where you are or who you are. Days are passing. Your brain is coloring in the world. Your eyes synchronize, and like that, the world is not flat anymore. Where is everyone? Where have your parents gone? If you are neglected now, it could affect your development. Lock eyes with your mum. As you grow into adulthood, you will forget these moments. They will fade from your memory. But they will have formed part of the deepest wiring of your brain and will echo through the rest of your life.
Yeah, so that launched in April. We'll be making another 6 pieces this year. And yeah, we're exploring interactive VR pieces. We're exploring CGI, volumetric capture, video, just trying to see kind of what works well for us at The Guardian.
Great, great. And then I myself and my students produce VR pieces under the name Journalism. Our first piece was, our first professional piece with ProPublica and the Texas Tribune, where we looked at the Houston Ship Channel and how a superstorm basically can wipe that off the face of the earth. And we recreated a superstorm, what scientists predict, a 30-foot wall of water coming up in VR, amongst other experiences. Since then, we've worked with the New York Times, NPR, covering the inauguration and the Women's March in DC with my students. Our most recent piece is one about the Salton Sea, which is the largest lake in California that is literally dying and is a major threat to the state.
This is the Salton Sea. It is 35 miles long and 15 miles wide, making it the largest lake in California. It is saltier than the Pacific Ocean, and over the next 30 years, it's projected to shrink by about a third. The Salton Sea we know today was created by an engineering accident in 1905, when water from the flooded Colorado River burst through an irrigation canal and flowed into the basin for over a year and a half. Decades ago, in its heyday, the Salton Sea was a popular destination for tourists. But now, many of the fish and wildlife are struggling to survive. As the sea evaporates, lake bed is exposed, causing toxic dust to affect the health of nearby communities. One of which is the Torres Martinez Desert Cahuilla tribe, who have lived in this part of the desert for centuries. All of these communities are impacted by the local agriculture industry, which provides the Salton Sea with water that has kept it afloat. But in the coming years, less runoff will reach the sea. If measures are not taken to address the rapidly shrinking Salton Sea, California's largest lake could turn into the state's largest environmental and public health disaster, one estimated to cost the state between $29 billion and $70 billion in the next 30 years. To get an explanation of the salinity changes and explore other water quality concerns, view The Science Behind the Sea story. Or, to learn more about the sea's history, go to the Salton Sea Through the Ages experience.
So this is a 7-part immersive series that we created with the Desert Sun and USA Today. Just launched a couple weeks ago. We employed drones, a new set of cameras, the Z1 Cam. Have you guys used the Z1 Cam at all? Highly recommend it. Kills the Omni in any GoPro rig. That's horrible compared to the Z1 Cam. There are a lot of apps for you to try and download because it looks much better up close in a headset on your phone, on your desktop, rather than on a big screen here. So here's a couple sample apps that I recommend. I include YouTube there because YouTube is a major player in how we distribute this content, as well as Facebook. But I found with YouTube, everyone's got that on their phone, and instantaneously you can start having people experience an HMD, head-mounted display experience. I am part of Journalism 360, as is Latoya, and Irving mentioned earlier during the brunch. Journalism 360 is an immersive news initiative, a joint initiative done by the Knight Foundation, Google News, and ONA. They're about to announce winners of a set of grants to help the industry embrace and lean into this disruption that is coming, offering a lot of trainings and a lot of other things to come. And I have a tip sheet. I've done a MOOC, I've done workshops for my students in my classroom, but I speak internationally and give workshops. And I created a little tip sheet with this URL, bit.ly/VR tip sheet, which will tell you apps to try out, experiences to try out, but it'll also tell you about gear to consume, but more importantly, to create. Different types of cameras, the cost, the challenges, different software that you need, lots of resources. One of the beautiful things I like about this, this community right now is that collaborativeness of the community. I have a VR Google group where we're constantly sharing ideas and troubleshooting together. For those who are actively creating immersive experiences for nonfiction and for journalism, that's what this group is for, from very basic questions, but more aimed to advanced questions. Okay, I'm going to move on over here. I'm attempting to live stream 360 on Facebook. I'm going to borrow that microphone. I'm going to have you hold it. This is the Insta360 Nano. Has anyone heard of Insta360? All right, one person I converted over there, Cindy. This is also a Chinese company. They're revolutionizing cameras. This is less than $200, and they have an Android version that's less than $130. So this is a really great, cheap way to start doing run and gun immersive stuff. So we're going to open this up to questions, so please come up and let us know when you have a question. But I'm going to start, yeah, I can hold that. In terms of culture in your newsroom, how have they embraced this disruption? I was talking to a colleague earlier about digital curmudgeons that have said, even though they've come up with the disruption of the internet and social media and mobile, not VR. They're like, no, VR is too much, it's not going to work. How do you deal with your newsroom, your company's culture and embracing of this platform? Anyone want to go first?
Well, at The Guardian, they've been incredibly positive. So right from the very senior levels, it's been it's considered a new form of journalism for us. And I think that is because if you can show how it can tell a story in a way that no other way that we can, that it is a kind of really valid form of journalism, then it will be accepted. So I think making content that makes sense for, for that treatment is the way to do that.
If I recall correctly, before 6x9 came out, there was a lot of worry that what is going to happen to our users' brains, and then a medical doctor had to be involved to evaluate the piece, to give editors more comfort in launching. Is that true?
I mean, so making 6x9 was quite a long process. I worked on it for about 9 months, and there were discussions right from the beginning about how we financed it, and then how it would fit in with the rest of our news content. But yeah, we didn't know what the effect would be on our users, and we wouldn't be there to hold their hands and look after them as well. We didn't know whether people would be watching the stuff while walking around the sitting room. I mean, the things about mobile VR is we have no control about where people are doing it and the kind of health and safety risks around that. On top of that, it's trying to show the psychological damage that can happen from isolation, and can be quite distressing. So yeah, I took it to 2 psychologists to see whether they thought that it was appropriate for us to be making this kind of content. These psychologists work with broadcast medias in terms of like giving ratings and suitabilities for programs, and also work with them around the wording, both before and afterwards, telling you afterwards to take a break and sit down and collect yourself if you need to. We think about that for every piece, what the kind of age restrictions should be.
Latoya, ESPN is an innovator in every front, and you're in charge of every innovation for the Undefeated, I guess. That's your title. So how is VR being welcomed with machine learning and all the other stuff that's happening?
Yeah, so I mean, at ESPN, it's the worldwide leader in sports, right? VR, so I'm lucky in terms of working at the Undefeated, where I generally only have to convince my boss, Kevin. And I normally come up and I'm like, Kev, I want to do this thing. And he's like, all right, cool, sounds great. Show me at the end. So that's a wonderful thing. I have a very streamlined pipeline from conception to go. Now that also means I don't necessarily have all the resources of ESPN behind me because that's a different type of process. And so I work closely with the ex-head of VR for ESPN, Mark Raleigh, who's now stepped out to start his own company. And then the other folks who run emerging tech at ESPN, like Aaron LaBerge and folks like that, Marie Donahue. And a lot of them, everyone is really bullish on technology at ESPN. We're actually remaking ourselves essentially as people know us as a television and sports company, but it's really starting to pivot to be more of a technology company. But the question for ESPN, and like I said, I come from the manager perspective, is always how do we justify this investment? And if we're making virtual reality products, how many of our users are actually going to tap into this? And what is the scale that makes it worth it for ESPN, right? So it's not a matter of if we can do it. We've probably been doing it for 10 years. The question is, especially like AR and advancements on television in particular broadcasts. But the question then becomes, are we going to develop something that has a user base that's lower than 30,000 people? Are we developing something that we don't currently host on our platform, so we do it through a vendor or through a side platform? What does that mean? So a lot of our VR stuff is actually in the Jaunt store because of our partnership with Jaunt. And same thing with ABC News. Quite a bit of their stuff is also in the Jaunt store. And then that question for ESPN is, okay, is this a thing we want to continue doing? Is it sustainable? Do we want to build our own infrastructure? What makes it worth the investment? And that's always the question with emerging tech. So it doesn't really matter what it is. We've probably played with it. But are we going to continue when there's so many things happening in voice, things like that? And that's the fight that we have.
It's interesting that you guys are tied to Jaunt because Disney is an investor to Jaunt, and that's one of the reasons why you gotta go with them, where there are other solutions that can help out. But that's some of those challenges, being nimble in a big company. Ben, can you talk about, in terms of culture and change and shift, you saw this technology and you decided to jump in, right? And not only jump in, but start a business to do the cinema. Talk about that jump.
So for my thoughts, I think why we will choose VR industry and to choose this industry and build VR cinema for everyone. I think VR technology is a revolution because for journalists, I think before we just made some voice, make some sentence, made some video for viewers, so talk about some story. Why? I think people use VR technology, they can get any details from video. I think we just give them full story. This is enough. Other thing, I think in the future, media industry is interactive. So people can use CG technology, use VR technology, and to choose story. People like is producers. They can make a different story for other people. That is amazing. People become to producer. That is different. Why just the journalist and the producer can make a story? I think that is a very, very important equality problem.
That has echoes of when the internet came. And that disruption, that thing, I worked in '99 where we did shovelware, where we took the newspaper and put it online. Didn't do anything to it except copy and paste. A lot of news leadership thought it was going to be a fad and was hoping it would go away. And it didn't, like blogs didn't, like social media didn't, like mobile didn't. What do you tell folks who are greeting this technology with folded arms? How do you get them to embrace that? That's the thing that I find that's still a challenge, even though this is not its final form yet. Technology has taught us that it's constantly changing. Jonathan, at your company, you guys have incorporated, do you have a microphone to pass along? Have incorporated it in news coverage and even in entertainment coverage. Well, you know what, let's jump to the title. What's next for you guys? What are you seeing and leaning into?
So as I mentioned, earlier this year, we opened up an open platform for all the content providers of VR to upload and share their VR contents on our platform. However, I think in order to make this really a win-win for all the third-party VR producers, there needs to be three things that's going to be changed. The first thing is that we need more directors and editors for VR. So since 2015, we have done quite a few VR live streaming and VR recordings in live events or sports games. However, what I found is that the lack of director or lack of storytelling mechanisms will make this VR content a little unbearable, to tell the truth sometimes.
The quality is unbearable?
Because what we do is usually we brought we set up
and we hands off
camera, and then nobody is doing the zoom in, zoom out, or doing the storytelling techniques, switching between cameras. And you can imagine that a person wear a VR headset for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and he will get bored.
Yes.
Without storytelling techniques. So I think that's the first thing needs to be changed. And the second thing is that even though we have high resolution contents for VR, however, because it's a 360 degrees picture, so technically speaking, the resolution for each direction is not high enough. So therefore, user can compare to the normal 1080p quality of videos compared to our VR, and then he will probably choose the 1080p normal video. So technology breakthrough needs still to happen in order to make the VR content more preferable for users. That's the second thing. And the third thing is that we need to build a good ecosystem for all the VR producers and the third-party content providers. For example, if they produce a good VR clip, should we give them enough return and to make them continuous to grow? I think that's something we still work on, and we have not yet reached to the good ecosystem for VR producers yet.
Yeah, the technology will solve number two. There's a lot of movement in that, but I like your first point is content. In October, I was here in Vienna for another conference and having dinner with Louis from Immersively that I believe is here. And over our dinner conversation, we framed a good story is a good story, regardless of the format. But right now, with the quality of VR as it is, we need to experiment and often fail to figure out what the hell a good story is. Just because I can put a camera here does not make it a good immersive story. And truth be told, even if it's in 360, most of the viewer is looking forward. They're not necessarily looking behind. So those are the techniques that you learn by doing and failing, editing and failing. Fran, you guys do more than 360. You guys are recreating pixel by pixel, an artist rendering as accurate as possible a cell, a prison cell, an artist rendering of tunnels, and a rat coming out that scared the crap out of me. And that is, a lot of journalists, when I talk about VR, get a little bit nervous about those ethics and like, hey, was this what the chair looked like? Was this what the table looked like? Was that exactly how the tunnels look like? That's one set of challenge. But the new challenge with First Impressions is involving an actor to recreate, because as far as we know, I don't know what's inside my baby's head, my kid's head. He's 8 now. I still don't understand him half the time. How do we do nonfiction storytelling with actors and recreations, and what is the guiding light for you guys?
I mean, for me, it's we do huge amounts of journalism before each piece, so we spent probably a month interviewing experts across the field, both in terms of visual development and kind of those who are involved in the kind of neurological development as well of babies. And so how that's portrayed, one way that we could do it is write an article saying, new research shows that you see red before you see blue and yellow, and this is, news story. We did all of this in the visual development. You see the reds and the greens coming before you see the blues and yellows. So we have visualized exactly what that latest research is. It's just you experience it rather than read exactly what that visual development is. We didn't have to have actors there in front of you, but in a way that's not the point of the piece. The piece is to try and show the latest developments in science. So for me, that is pure journalism. We sent the prototypes back to the scientists we're working with, to a professor at Harvard University who's been working on the neglect of children at a young age and the implications of that. He's now using that to teach his students. So it is journalistically really stands up. Just because we've used actors to come and interact with you, that doesn't mean that the kind of science is not, the most up to date.
Was that the first piece with actors ever? And was there any pushback on like, my gosh, actors? People get nervous.
Yeah, it's the first piece with actors, but 6x9 also, I conducted all the interviews in the second person, so even though all of the people who you hear are previously incarcerated, they talk to you as a prisoner yourself. Now that is also a quite an affected way of doing an interview and using voices and using real testimony. So, all the time I'm trying to think, if you're putting someone in a first-person experience, what is the most kind of journalistic way we can do that is also the most effective in terms of that interpretation?
Yeah, we have to experiment and try what is best for the story. Are there any questions from the audience? There's a hand over there. Is there okay, microphones are coming around. Please raise your hand if you have a question as well. First question up here. I didn't see any other hands yet.
Oh, hello. There we go. Yeah. So, Jonathan, what's been the advertiser appetite for your VR shows? And to the rest of the panel, what lessons have you learned about actually monetizing your content?
If it's not ethics, it's money. Those are the two things that we're all about in journalism right now.
So let me repeat the question. I don't think I've got the question right. Are you asking what's the advertisements for the VR content, right?
Have they embraced it? Have advertisers want to participate in this platform? Are they paying for it?
Oh, so far, no. There's no advertisers participating in the VR yet. So that's the third point that I pointed out. We need to build an ecosystem that's good for both the VR producers and also the platform. But right now, we are in the stage of curating the VR producers. Right now, the entire Tencent Video platform is it's big enough so that we can subsidize the VR producers in order to make them grow. But however, I think it's prominent that we have enough subsidiaries from either the advertisers or from the paid users from subscriptions in order to make this ecosystem grow.
Yeah, it's a chicken and the egg thing. Ben, I was asking you, how do you monetize the theater?
Yeah, we development our software so we can look at any big data from our cinema. So what is content to show our consumer? So what is consumer's habit? So we can know everything from our software. Other thing, I think we respect our partner, we respect the copyright. So we will share our box office to our copyright partner, so they can know everything from our theater and our cinema. That is very important.
So it's data.
Yes, big data. It's big data. Other thing, I think for this moment we need more interest because we need more technology, we need more money, we need more investor. But I think producers' interest and consumers' interest is most important. So we built VR cinema for consumers. They can enter to our cinema. 1 hour, just $5 US. Then they can get 10 free things from our cinema, like is 3D printing, like is tea and coffee. So why we very cheap for consumer, make very, very interest for our consumer. That is very important in this moment. Other thing I will share Jackie Ma's sentence, today is difficult, tomorrow is difficult, but after tomorrow, I think everything is amazing for VR industry.
It's always on the horizon. For ESPN, Latoya, you guys are like mountains of money and all innovation, right? Well, the ROI.
Mostly. It's interesting times these days. But so the interesting thing about ESPN outside of every other media company that I've worked for is that ESPN asks the money question up front. So when you are pitching ideas and stuff like that, they're like, okay, this is so cool. How are we going to make this a business? Like, what does this actually look like? And so what's interesting is in the ESPN VR experiments, what we've seen is either, one, they're coming under an existing sponsorship deal, right? So College Game Day, which we did, was under a deal that Home Depot currently sponsors. So Home Depot was in the built VR experience that is on the Jaunt thing. And you see the Home Depot logo the same way you see it on a TV broadcast, right? Product placement is another area where people are monetizing against that. But what we've also seen, and I think to the questioner's point, is that the VR market right now, it's floating running on artificial money, and we know that, right? A lot of the big players are spending a lot to sponsor it, to have things on their platform. So it's the Facebooks and the Samsungs and the Sonys of the world who are going out to creators outside of the games industry, which we'll talk about in a second, but who are going to creators and saying, please make content for us, we'll pay you because we need consumers to adopt this more because we're making these products, right? And so it's a little bit of the tail wagging the dog, right? It's not necessarily consumer demand, and that makes it more difficult in a traditional advertising strategy where you're going to be able to say against the metrics you have, say, you know, so I think like John was saying before, like 100,000 people watch the stream. That's normally how you would sell something like this. This has not been happening with VR just because of the distribution channels and things like that. So there's a lot of things that need to mature before there's like a financial maturity in the market. The only place that's really cracking this is games and game development, right? And so if you go to GDC, the Game Developers Convention, they did 2 different talks this year. One was the Awesome Video Games Data Report. The other one was the Awesome VR Data Report. And they were talking about how particularly on the Stream Store, right, you're starting to see a lot more publishers with direct sales going up, right? And so people actually paying for and buying at about $25 to $30 a VR experience. So Tilt Brush is $30 when you download it, right? And that is a direct revenue line for publishers. A lot of people are doing things that are, games are in the $7 to $20 area, which is a very high level for an internet download, right? So the market is coming, it's maturing, but it's not here yet. So right now it's being propped up by VC money, and that makes it really hard to make a monetization strategy. The tack that I took at the Undefeated, because we are, you know, we are part of ESPN, but we're not necessarily like the flagship. This is not SportsCenter money that we're throwing around, right? And so my tactic was to just show how much more cheaply we could make this, to say that we could take a VR team and go out there. I mean, right now it's 360, but Charisse, who's my main developer, is a Unity developer. She can also do the VR builds. We just haven't had a project that requires that yet, though there's one in the works, so that'll be fun. But our whole thing was that this costs the same as sending out an E&G camera team, right? This is the same amount of money. In the same way that you would just deploy a crew, have them cover something, call it a day, it's this amount of money as well, which then offsets the cost that you would have to recover to try to make it work out financially.
Off any of those apps? They're individual apps, right? They're not baked in. You have to download those apps.
We have a Guardian VR app that works on Daydream at the moment, and that will work on Cardboard and Gear VR later this year. So that'll be, we will relaunch it.
Did Google give you a bunch of money to do that?
We've got a partnership with them both to
Does the partnership have a dollar sign?
It does.
There, I asked for you guys.
So we're looking at the revenue models we're looking for is tech partnerships, commercial partnerships, and philanthropic ones too. And we're kind of currently investigating all 3 at the moment. But for sure, the kind of commercial opportunities seem to be smaller than the tech opportunities, as Latoya is saying. Philanthropic organizations are interested as well. You know, we're particularly interested in doing pieces which have got social causes. And so, you know, there's opportunities there, and sometimes it's a merge. 6x9 was a merge of all 3 in terms of money coming together. So we're definitely still exploring that, and as well trying to see how we can be more efficient in terms of making pieces. So multi-skilling people in our team and seeing, you know, our aim is to make good quality pieces. Like, we see that there is not a lot of good content out there in the industry, and for VR journalism to succeed, we have to make good work. Yeah. But at the same time, we are still experimenting, and we have to kind of see all of these pieces are prototypes at the moment, yes, and recognize that. So not be so precious that this is, you know, the definitive piece of VR journalism, but we are trying with every single one to make pieces that we feel are Guardian quality. That we really want people to feel it is worth their while to download quite a large bit of content, put on a television on their head and watch. And so, you know, that is what we're trying to do at the moment, is reduce the costs of production while still making good quality content and investigate those 3 revenue streams.
One piece of advice I give folks that are experimenting in this space is to experiment and to produce something, but not necessarily publish it. Because that's okay that it wasn't at that level and it shouldn't be published. That's okay, because you learned a lot.
It's very hard for news organizations to do that. We are not
used
to doing that. Because it
costs a lot of money to do that little.
And so, you know, I would, maybe for students it's easier, but...
I'm talking about starting with these. So this 360 cameras, not the CG Unity stuff, but for $200 you can not embarrass yourself by not publishing.
But still, I think you're right that we need to be prototyping, experimenting, and be prepared to throw stuff away.
Yeah.
And we're not used to doing that.
Yeah, yeah. Another question? Is there another question? Any hands up? I can't see. There's one in the back over there. As we get to that question, I want to ask you guys about diversity in voices. We're at the forefront, still at the forefront, it seems, of defining this community, and I'm seeing a lot of conferences exclude diverse voices. This virtual reality in VR journalism was built because of Nonita La Peña influencing this kid named Palmer Luckey, who created the Oculus Rift that was purchased by Facebook. Palmer Luckey, for those who don't know, was a journalism student that dropped out to focus in tech. Journalism is in the epicenter of this, but I noticed at some tech conferences, it's white male dominated. That scares the crap out of me. In every panel I try to be on, I try to force diversity if they're not thinking about it. How are you guys thinking about that in terms of what's next? How is your staff in terms of representing those diverse voices? Because quality content, if it's only for males, you're leaving 50% of your potential revenue not even on the table. Thoughts on that?
We're making a number of pieces. I can't go into details of what they are, but we are, for each of the pieces which looks at a particular demographic, we're trying to involve them actually in the production. So
really?
Rather than saying you're just a contributor, we want to take your story and that's it, consider them consultants along the way. And actually I did that for 6x9, that the people that I interviewed, we also then worked with them all the way through the process to make sure that the CGI cell was accurate and represented the experiences they had been through. We put the actual books that they had read. I went back to them all the way through the 9 months so that they were essentially, they felt like they were making the piece. They were making the piece with us. And actually we took the piece to Tribeca last April, and the people who had contributed their stories to the pieces were there at the installation. We built a 6x9 foot cell. And they talked to the people saying, this is my project, do you want to come and try it? And I feel like, you're right, they're not necessarily on the panel now, but to be including them actually in the production line, and for several other pieces we've got this year, we want to have essentially consultant producers involved in every single piece we're doing. Both because of the journalism, it's actually really important that we're not interpreting other people's experiences and just saying, well, 2 hours talking to you is enough for me to get what it's like to be in solitary confinement.
Yeah, I got you.
But also because you're right, that we need to increase the diversity in terms of making this content and what it is.
Jonathan, for your platform aiming to do UGC, how do you kind of encourage diverse voices and not just early adopter, techie, boys with toys type of voices?
So in terms of diversity, I think we haven't run into the problem of not making the VR programs not diverse enough. So right now we have VR shows for sports games, which is probably more interested to male users. However, we also have variety shows that are more interested to female users. And also we have some reality shows that are universal. For example, we have this Chinese versions of Utopia, which is a 24/7 reality show, having 15 people living in a farm in a closed system, and then they live there for a year with limited amount of food and resources, and they build their family, even their social systems. And in that reality show, we have this 360 shootings for the entire reality show. So all these programs, I think we are very lucky that we have not run into those diversity problems.
Great. I don't want to forget the question. A hand over there.
Hi, this is Lei from CBN. My question goes to the lady from The Guardian. I'm just wondering how many people are involved in the piece you showed, and what's the budget for every piece you are doing? Thank you.
I want to put a little asterisk just when you talk about budget, especially for the Guardian pieces, that, that's CG, that's Unity, that's Google, that's other folks funding and helping.
Yeah, it really depends on the piece. So the 360 pieces, like First Impressions, we shot that ourselves. I would say that's still as high quality as 6x9, which was made in Unity, but the costs are for sure different. It depends if it's interactive. First impressions is actually, you can make noises all the way through, and you can call over your mum at kind of 2/3 of the way in. It's, you know, trying to emphasize this point about interaction, of it being a kind of two-way process. But that adds cost, but we've got an in-house developer, we've got an in-house DOP, and we try and be efficient, because so these aren't all full-time positions. We'll pull in our DOP, who's one of our great photographers, for a day or two of shooting, and then the rest of the team will take that material away and edit it. So that I mean, there was a core team of maybe 4 people for that piece. For something like 6x9 or Underworld, we work with an external agency to do all the CGI, but then the in-house team will be smaller because we're dealing with the kind of journalism, the narrative content, and the kind of user interaction. So probably a handful of people for each piece. Oh, and the budget of it, well, yeah, it will range anything from an external costs of, you know, kind of, I probably shouldn't give out the actual dollars themselves, but from, you know, small to very large.
Yeah,
depending
I'm scared
on
that
the,
if they hear the budget,
depending
people
on
will be scared about it, right? The budget for game development, if you hear a budget for one top-of-the-line video game, we'd freak out, but it costs that money with the developers so they can charge $70 for a game, right? And this space right now could be a $130 camera to $130,000 camera, so it just really depends. But you're focusing, Latoya, on kind of run and gun stuff, right? So do you have any advice or budget numbers for that?
Sure. So, I mean, to give you a sense, I mean, like, we all know how much essentially a video piece costs, right? It could be anywhere from, depending on if you have it in-house, to almost free, to if you're outsourcing a team, like $3,000 or so for the day, $5,000 or so for the day, depending on how big your team is. It scales up from there. So trying to bring VR production down to those costs. Like I said, if we're using a third-party camera or something like that, and it's not a partnership, which we also do, if it's not a partnership, right, a lot of the retail, like the rack rate, for some of these things, could be $40,000 to rent the machine and the crew for like a 2-day stretch, right? It can be a lot. And so I can already see people shaking their heads like, we cannot justify this in our newsroom. Totally, which is why, again, now we're back on the cheap side where we're like, well, we got this Omni that we paid $5,000 for, and I hired a Unity developer who you know, was fresh out of school and had finished her master's. And so she is now, and she happens to have an editor background, and she's doing it. So there's a lot of editors, there's a lot of video editors, guys, that are learning to stitch. Like, so don't overlook the fact that somebody might be a video editor and they're playing in 360, they're playing in VR, right? And if you're willing to give them that time to learn, that becomes an asset in your newsroom that you can use to make that a lot cheaper, right? I mean, but these budgets can be huge. Our ESPN budgets for some things can be in the millions. Yeah. It just depends on like what we're doing, who the partner is, how this goes, right? That said, like I said, don't get too scared about the amount of money. I know it's easy to say because you're like, oh yeah, whatever, you guys burn money all the time. But the issue is, and the way that I normally phrase this to higher-ups as well, is that when we're learning to create things, VR is a totally new format, right? Most recently, the thinking has been that VR is closer to live theater than it is to filmmaking. And so a lot of the techniques that we use in filmmaking, right, a lot of the shots even, that like Jonathan's talking about, like what is a close-up in VR? We don't really have that yet. We can kind of make that. We kind of can't make that with the cameras. Half the cameras are set them and go, and you can't really touch it, or, you know, so there's a lot of things that you have to work out with it. But you're also learning things like stereoscopic sound, and where you place your sound in a way that is not mixed and balanced in the same way as video, right? You're learning things like interactive narrative. So I was at a panel at GDC, and they did this amazing thing about parallel storylines, and how you might have 15 parallel storylines running, and your user is now trying to figure out how do you navigate a non-linear story, which at ESPN was blowing people's minds. Yeah. And they were like, you know, how come I can't just tell the user where to go? So it's those things. That's the intangible part of investing in VR, right? Because you're learning how to solve a problem that is going to exist in the future but doesn't quite exist now, and you're trying to get your whole team to understand that thinking, which is almost as much as the actual cost.
That's brilliant. That's perfect. Another question? Any hands? I don't see one at the moment. But photogrammetry and videogrammetry is the next thing we're nerding out on. That's creating CG models based on photography, taking a photo of an item, or using video cameras surrounding a subject, and from that creating not an artist rendering of somebody, but the somebody in 3D, a hologram, if you will. We were just talking prior to the session, Who is dabbling with that? And Fran, you're dabbling with
Well, we're just about to release in the next few days a piece which we LiDAR scanned. We've never done that before, and that was really exciting in terms of layering different environments on top of each other and then kind of building your path through that, and the possibility for that was really exciting. We're going to do a piece in the fall which is just photogrammetry but very interactive as well. So it definitely brings up like possibilities that we just could not do if we were to build the whole environment in CG, which is what we'd have to do to make it as interactive as we want to. Also, we're really interested in exploring all the different techniques, and I think we should be. I mean, of course, we've got a lot to learn in terms of just mastering 360-degree video. I mean, that is a challenge in itself, but I think that we should just be experimenting with all these different possibilities. I always say to my team, experiment, but try and be as focused and narrow as possible at the same time. Don't try and do 10 different scenes, really complicating branching narratives. Do it, but make it essentially each thing is one prototype and one experiment in one thing. So first impressions is all set in one place, in one scene, even though we've tried to do interactivity, we've tried to tell two different parts of kind of a journalistic story, contain it. And so it'll be the same with the photogrammetry project. Like, what can that one scene be, and how can we really make that interactive and tell the story as well as possible?
One piece I should recommend as well is from Emblematic group called After Solitary. That's Emblematic partnered with Frontline, funded by the Knight Foundation to do a solitary confinement. Your 6x9 was an artist rendering, an incredibly accurate artist rendering of the cell. After Solitary was scanned. They scanned it, and it is amazing. You can look under the table in the book and read what was on the book if you can walk around, but then they scanned this ex-con named Kenny. And he's a hologram that holds presence with you and tells you about his experience in this cell. And it's just really amazing. What other emerging technologies, what's the future for you guys? What are you guys seeing and experimenting with? Latoya?
I mean, I just realized I can't talk about half of that. Sorry. So I'm lucky to be at ESPN, which is owned in part by the Walt Disney Company. And so that means I also get to work with LucasArts. I also get to work with Pixar. I get to work with all
you told me you went to Pixar, and I was so jealous.
Yeah, and it's so a lot of the stuff is not here yet. Lucas just dropped a new kind of VR immersive experience that I haven't done, that my friend Brian worked on. And it's just like the techniques that they're using, it's legendary. Like, it's going to be huge, it's going to be amazing. Unity is also doing some really interesting stuff. So a lot of my friends this weekend were at the Hollow Hack that Microsoft sponsored in New York, and they brought a bunch of developers together to see what they can create. The AR kit that just dropped from Apple.
Yes.
It was so quick starting to see videos from developers already. And we're all watching this space because there's so many new things that are coming out that are going to be amazing. Here's a thing that we're trying to solve in sports to give you a sense. So right now, VR, you shoot it at about 24 FPS, maybe 30. Sports is generally shot at 60 FPS, right? There's no depth of field in VR that can capture a football rolling across it. Like, none of those things work for us, right? And so it's been a real challenge to try to adapt this kind of space that, is kind of made for a little bit more of a static experience to a dynamic and fast-paced thing like sports, right? So figuring out kind of like, what is the technological advance is going to be fascinating. The same thing with AR coming up, right? I was at a workshop at Stanford, and one of the things they were talking about was that everybody knows what they want to do with it, but we are literally like seconds away from the next innovation that's going to change things, right? Microsoft, the guy Mark Poliflues was complaining that the HoloLens was over-engineered. Yeah. They were like, there's too many sensors, there's too many things that we're supposed to be doing. We'd like there to be less. We just can't make less right now. But they know that, in the next 5 years or so, something is going to click, and then everything explodes.
I just saw something called Zapbox, which is from Zapper. Google them. They have a Kickstarter. It is cardboard for MR. Did you have something to add?
Yes, I believe what is future for virtuality, I believe is eye tracking. So in the future, I think we can get big data from like is Vive and Google and Gear VR. So we can know what is people, where do people looking. So that is very important for advertisement. So then we can take some opportunity for VR industry from this industry. Yeah.
And that is our time. Please, a round of applause for this amazing panel. Thank you, guys. Go catch a flight.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you, speakers coming from China, coming from UK.